Of course, Canadians are mad at the Trump tariff threat. We're not being treated as a neighbor and ally. We're not being treated like a friend who immediately, for example, sent water bombers to help the California fires, or stepped up immediately during 9/11 when U.S. airspace was closed and 6,600 passengers were stranded in Gander, where the people welcomed them into their homes. I mean, that's what friends do. They don't threaten with bully tactics, and they don't break the essence of signed agreements like the U.S. Mexico Canada trade deal. I mean, there's so many aspects to talk about the Trump tariff tactics and the bombast of Canada becoming the 51st state. But I think it'd be a major mistake to focus solely on President Trump. Although I'll bet the federal Liberal government hopes we do, because as the National Post put it, in quotes, blame for a good part of the pain that will follow Trump tariffs will lie within our own country and its utter contempt for economic growth. That's the key phrase, utter contempt for economic growth. Sam Cooper put it this way: it needs to be said that Ottawa's parade of anti-energy policies, red tape on resource development, lack of investment in our armed forces, and our soft on crime laws have left our country in an incredibly vulnerable and weakened state economically and politically. The fact is, under the Trudeau government, economic growth has never been a priority. As the former head of the Bank of Canada, David Dodge, stated in quotes, the policies of the government in power and the proclivities of the current Prime Minister are not particularly oriented toward the hard work of generating economic growth. And we're living the consequences. But instead, the government's priorities have been climate change, LGBTQ+, expanding the government into areas like dental care and daycare and pharmacare, but not economic growth. Now, that's perfectly legitimate to focus on these policies and not economic growth. But I'm just saying they come with consequences. I mean, the current vulnerability of our economy to the tariff threat, including the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs, further drop in the Canadian dollar and our standard of living, and a huge increase in the debt and deficit are just some of those consequences. When it comes to oil and gas, you know what? I can't help but mention the profound irony that many of the same individuals who now acknowledge oil as Canada's most powerful asset in a trade war with the US are the very ones who spent the last 9 years actively working to undermine the industry. The point is, we're entering a trade war / dispute, whatever you want to call it, from a position of economic weakness and financial weakness as a direct result of our own policy choices and refusal to take seriously the economic decline that's been reflected in so many stats. I mean, starting with what? The Bank of Canada issuing the unprecedented warning that productivity and declining GDP per capita is an emergency. Yet the government's response to falling productivity, declining capital investment, falling competitiveness ranking was to raise taxes on mid and higher income individuals and small business while increasing capital gains taxes and regulations. That's the opposite of what they should be doing. Now, it's kind of smile thinking because Liberal partisans are going to disagree with that statement. But guess what? The leading contenders for the Liberal leadership agree with me, which is why all of them promise to drop the capital gains tax increases and do away with the carbon tax. The government seems oblivious to the economic challenges which are now being exposed by the tariff threat. You know, just a few weeks ago, during an interview with CNN's Jake Tapper, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stated in quotes, our economy is doing very well. What? He made the same statement with Stephen Colbert in September, completely oblivious to the fact that 2 million plus Canadians are visiting food banks monthly, or the 53% of Canadians in a recent RBC poll who said they feel financially paralyzed. I mean, there are so many more examples, but the point I want to make is that, to borrow from the National Post again, our lack of concern for the economy and utter contempt for economic growth has left us profoundly vulnerable to the U.S. tariff threats. Now, the good news, and maybe I'm just having some wishful thinking, is finally the importance of the economy and our policy choices seem to be much more appreciated by the vast majority of Canadians, along with the cost of the anti-business, anti-economic agenda that's been featured for 9 years. You know, as I regularly say, politics is for adolescents, while economics and finance are for grown-ups. Well, we're getting a good example as the consequences of the Trump tariff come to light and the Trump tariff threat means anything, it's that it's time for grown-ups to be in charge.